Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Kane. I think most of you are probably accustomed, if not outright sick of seeing me. I think this is week number 3 now in a series of E-rate trainings, and we thank you for joining us today. I am once again joined by my partner in E-rate hijinks, Caprice Robinson. Um, we are today going to have some discussion and share with you some information regarding the KETs contracts, the mini bid process, and filing a Form 470. We'll do an online demonstration of filing the Form 470. As always, I want to encourage you to jump into the chat or just jump in to the conversation, unmute yourself, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. We do want to keep this as interactive as possible. There will be time at the end for some additional questions if you want to hold on to them. And then for the sake of openness, we will stop the recording at the end after the official Q&A session is over, and we will hang on the line here and allow folks who might not want to be recorded with their questions to ask any perhaps more specific questions that you might have. Without further ado, I am going to go ahead and jump right in. So I will share my screen. I've got a brief set of PowerPoint slides, and for a change, I actually do mean brief because unlike last week that went on perhaps just a little bit too long, we aren't going to run as long as we did last week, thankfully. This should take just about the full hour and hopefully no more than that. So, as mentioned, we'll be talking about the KETs contracts, mini bids, and filing the Form 470 today. All right, so with respect to the KETs contracts, we're obviously talking about the eligible networking equipment contracts. We're talking about purchases that you're required to use those contracts in order to obtain the equipment in question: switches, routers, wireless access points, wireless controllers, etc., and then also basic maintenance of these items. Excuse me. For a list of the providers, you can access the KETs product and services network products and services webpage. The link is in this PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint will be posted and distributed so that you have access to that. But you will find there a list of not only the contract holders, but their resellers as well. Contact information is provided for each one of them so that if you have any questions or you need to reach out to them as part of your mini bid process, you will be able to find the email addresses of the people that you need to reach out to in order to begin that process. And because the use of the KETs contract is required, E-rate applicants, you are not required to fill out a Form 470. This is because KDE established these contracts based on a statewide Form 470. So we did the process of the Form 470, went out to bid, and then selected a handful of service providers who then in some cases have named some resellers to work alongside of them. In this instance, because there are multiple options for you under the state contract, E-rate rules require that you submit or go through the mini bid process. This is kind of like the Form 470 process, but it doesn't require you to actually file the Form 470. You need to reach out to folks and request a quote from the available contract holders and resellers. We'll talk about the mini bids here. The mini bids are required, as I mentioned, for E-rate support to purchase those networking components and basic maintenance from the KETs contracts. When you start the mini bid process, when you go out and you identify what it is that you're seeking, you are required to contact all KETs vendors for the quotes, contract holders and resellers. Please make sure that you do that. That is critically important, and failure to do so could result in the unfortunate situation of you being denied your funding. Um, when you go through this mini bid process, there is no 28-day waiting period. There's no specific amount of time that you are required to give for responses from the vendors from the vendors on those contracts. That having been said, we do recommend that you give at least 10 business days for the vendors to respond. Um, that's sort of just a decent sort of amount of time. In terms of the guidance that USAC has shared regarding the mini bid process, this is the number that they have said, give about 10 days. My suggestion is 10 business days, but I think 10 days in general, even if there are a couple of, a weekend or two in that process, or excuse me, in the course of that time period. I think you can probably, in a pinch, get away with 10 days, but I recommend 10 business days. More importantly, perhaps than any of that, is to set a specific deadline. So when you send out your email asking for a quote, listing out all of the information that you want, all of the services that you are seeking, make sure that you set a deadline for their response. That way, if any of the responses show up after you have after the deadline that you've set, you are not required to review those or go back and re-review all of the bids that you've received. Also recommend that you take a screenshot of the web page that's linked on the previous page to show that you contacted all the potential bidders as of the day that you sent your mini bid, and keep this in your records. This is going to be important because, to a certain extent, the vendors that appear on vendors, and I should say resellers as well, the contract holders and resellers, the resellers will change from time to time. And because of that, it's important to be able to establish that on the day that you submitted your mini bid request, your request for quotes, that you did in fact, according to the schedule of contracts and resellers, that you contacted all of them. And then you go through the process of evaluating the quotes as if you had filed a Form 470 and then select the winner. And we'll talk about that in a moment. One thing that I want to add, when you list out the request for a quote, make absolutely sure that you request, or I should back up, excuse me. If you are going to ask for a specific piece of equipment, make absolutely sure that you use the words "or equivalent." You need to be absolutely technology or vendor neutral in terms of what it is that you're requesting. So, for example, you may already know that you want a Bob's Networking router model ABC123. And that's fine. You may know that that's exactly what you want. However, in order to at least maintain the appearance of impartiality, you need to make sure that you request that or equivalent. That way, a competitor to Bob's Networking Equipment Company can submit to you an alternative that may be much better priced, may have just as good of features, may be in fact compatible with your network infrastructure. They should have the opportunity to compete reasonably for that business. But if you have already decided that you want Bob's Networking Equipment, model ABC123, that essentially eliminates them from competition. And as we've talked about in prior training sessions, it is of critical importance to maintain vendor neutrality as you go through the competitive bidding process. For 2025, there's a little bit of a twist that perhaps those of you who haven't been around those of you have been around for a while, this is going to be a little bit different for you. You may receive quotes with different pricing. Contract holders and resellers will have the option to offer different pricing from each other. They can use price as a means of differentiating themselves from each other. So it's quite possible that you'll receive mini bid responses which have different pricing for the same item. This means then that you'll need to differentiate your scoring of prices on your mini bid responses. Now, that having been said, price must be the most heavily weighted factor in all, as in and also in the mini bid process, bid evaluation processes. Also important to note that the contract holders and resellers, while they may be offering different pricing, they must meet or exceed the percent off MSRP rate indicated in their contract. That information is also available on the website. Under that first column, you'll see when the discount off MSRP is listed, they must be offering that discount or exceeding that discount rate in order to maintain their compliance with the KETs with the KETs contract under which they are offering their equipment and services. In addition, service providers must charge the same price for services or equipment for similarly situated customers. That is to say that the E-rate service providers are required to maintain compliance with the E-rate lowest corresponding price rule. That is that rule that requires them to charge the same price for services or equipment for similarly situated customers. So that is to say that if one reseller, for example, offers a 77% discount, that they should be offering that 77% discount for all of their similarly situated customers. Now, that having been said, similarly situated is open to interpretation, but you would expect that a adjacent district that's similarly sized, that are nearby each other, that have similar demographics, similarly sized not only geographically but demographically as well. You would expect that those the prices offered to those two districts would be the same in as long as those two districts are similarly situated. So once you've sent out your request for quote, and I mentioned email before, that's all you need to do is just email each and every one of the contract holders and resellers that are listed on the website. You get your responses back, and basically the bid evaluation for your mini bid is going to look the same as any bid evaluation that you would do for a Form 470. So this applies to both mini bids and Form 470, and I know that we talked about this a little bit last week, but it's also worth just a brief reiteration, and that is that you'll need to set up a bid evaluation matrix. Basically, you're going to list off your criteria down the left-hand column and the names of the vendors across the top on the top row, and then you have a number of points that are possible in one column, in the column perhaps next to the name of the provider, or excuse me, in the column next to your criteria. Each criteria gets a certain number of points assigned to it, and then you judge the responses based upon the various criteria and assign points based upon how well they responded to that. Price must always be the most heavily weighted factor, but it's not the only one. You may include other criteria that could include, and this is not an exhaustive list, compatibility of product and service with your existing infrastructure. Obviously, that is incredibly important. Prior experience or past performance with and a relationship that you may have in terms of knowing that you're dealing with somebody who is reliable or not reliable. It's a reputation sort of thing. Price of non-E-rate eligible items. So if you are interested in purchasing some non-E-rate eligible items from the KETs providers, that as a part of your mini bid, you can certainly include those items on there and then evaluate the price of those separately from evaluating the E-rate eligible items in terms of their price. Make sure that your price of non-E-rate eligible items has assigned a lower weight than the price of the E-rate eligible items. Another example would be the ability to serve the entire district. You may have, I don't think that is going to be too much of an issue with respect to the KETs vendors. I think they are all supposed to be able to, as a part of their agreement with the KETs contract, they're supposed to be able to serve all districts within the state. But that's just another example of something that might differentiate one from the next. As I mentioned, you'll assign points. Yeah, question?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. There was a question in the chat, but I'll wait until you get through. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll get there when I get to the end of the end of this page. As I mentioned, you'll assign points to the criteria. You'll score the bids based on the evaluation matrix and then select a winner. You'll establish a contract if needed. The contract would be for something, for example, that you go out to bid for yourself for the Form 470, and then you will file your Form 471 after the allowable contract date. If we're talking about something that you filed a Form 470 for. If it's based on a mini bid, you can move straight from selecting a winner into filing the Form 471. Caprice, go ahead. What was the question?
Heath Cartwright is asking, can prices be different for smaller districts based on the size alone?
Quite honestly, I couldn't tell you one way or another because I've never seen that specific item come into question. Based solely upon the size, again, we're coming into one of those questions of it's difficult to define similarly situated. So I wish I had a better response for you as far as that's concerned. I would expect that if you had two districts that are adjacent to one another, they are similarly sized, similar geographically, similar demographically, that, yeah, I think in those kinds of instances, I would expect to see that the pricing offered by a specific reseller to both of those would be the same for the same item. So there's a lot of sort of pre-criteria that need to be met before you get to that point. But if they are all the way across the same, then, or very, very similar, then I would suggest that, yeah, you would expect to see the pricing that's being offered by the same vendor or the same reseller to be the same for the exact same item. Hopefully that helped at least a little bit.
Okay.
Caprice, were there any? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask if there were any more.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So Danielle BeCraft, she's asking, when you set a deadline for vendors to respond, are you required to ignore any received after the deadline, or does it just give you the option to do so?
Are you required to ignore it? No, you're not necessarily required to ignore it, but I think if you do that, that's a really good question though. Danielle, I think if you went through the process of setting a deadline, and let's say you received 5 bids on time, and you received 1 bid afterwards, and you looked at that 1 bid that came after your deadline and you realize, hey, that might just be the best option that we have. We'd like to include that. I think you can go ahead and include that. That having been said, if you choose to do so, you would need to make sure that any others that came in late were also given the full evaluation process and not dismissed. So you can't just cherry pick the ones that you like the best out of the ones that came in late. I think hopefully that makes sense to you and understand that. But that I think is going to be key. If you decide to accept one, you would have to accept any of them up until the point when you score them all and make your decision. So, and that's really kind of where that all comes from. Is we have seen where in other places, in other states, there's been a couple of situations where folks have just simply not set a deadline, but they said, well, we want your response within 10 days or something. And, oh, excuse me, they didn't set a deadline at all. Excuse me, they didn't set a deadline at all, but they had a deadline in their own head. And so they said, well, and I actually, this relates to a Form 470. What happened was they filed the Form 470. They received a collection of bids within the 28 days, and then they took another week after the Form 470 was filed, or after the 28 days was over. They waited an additional week before starting the bid evaluation process. But within that week, they received an additional bid. They did not select that one as the winner. They selected one from within the 28 days. That vendor came back and said, well, we submitted, there was no deadline offered, and they had our bid prior to when they started the bid evaluation process. We feel like it's only appropriate that because there was no deadline established, that our bid should have been considered as well. And the FCC agreed with them. FCC said, yeah, just because you've waited the 28 days doesn't mean that there was a deadline in specific. So basically what the FCC has said is, if you set a deadline, anything after the deadline can be ignored. If you don't set a deadline, you must accept all bids up until the point when you actually start reviewing the bids and selecting your winner. Hopefully, Danielle, that answered your question. But I would suggest that, yeah, if you don't set a deadline, accept anything up until the point when you start evaluating. If you do set a deadline, then anything that comes in after that, I think you have the choice if you haven't already started. But if you've already started, then they should be eliminated from the running. Any others, Caprice?
No, there aren't any more.
Okie doke. All right. So as we wrap up this look at the bid evaluation, if you do not receive any bids on your Form 470 or on a mini bid after your 28-day period or mini bid deadline, make sure that you memorialize the fact that you did not receive any bids. Email yourself. I also suggest adding one other recipient, the CFO, superintendent, somebody else within the organization, just to say, as of such and such a date, we've passed our mini bid deadline and we did not receive any bids to date. Maintain a copy of that and keep it in your E-rate documentation. At that point, you can then go out to individual vendors and request a bid, request a quote. So you're free to do that only after you've exhausted either your 28-day waiting period or the mini bid period that you identified in your request. And then certainly, as we've talked about in past sessions, your document retention is 10 years from the last day to receive services, and that is going to be a different date for Category 1 versus Category 2. For Category 1, that's going to be June 30th of a particular funding year, and then add 10 years from that. versus September 30th for category 2, and then of course add 10 years to that. When we are talking about filing the Form 470, and really this applies here not only to the filing of the Form 470, but also to mini bids as well. The key to this is making sure that you conduct a fair and open process. You want to make sure that all bidders are treated the same. You want to make sure that none of them has exclusive knowledge of the project. You want to make sure that you're accepting gifts no more than $20 in value and no more than $50 in value for the year from any given vendor. So let's say, for example, we had this example come up just last week that am I allowed to accept a lunch from a particular vendor as long as the value of that lunch is less than $20? Yes, you may. At least in terms of E-rate rules. I can't speak to any other gift rules out there, conflicts of interest kinds of things for other aspects of this. But from an E-rate perspective, yes, you can accept that lunch as long as it's $20 or less in value. You can do that. Let's just say that the lunch is $19.99. You can accept that lunch twice from the same vendor in any given year and not have gone over that $50 total. However, if you exceed that $50 total from that any given vendor, now you're running into violations of the gift rules. So be very, very careful. My suggestion in all of this is just to give me a big smile and say, hey, thanks, really appreciate it, but no thank you. I want to make sure that I'm keeping myself clear of any violations, and that way I don't. If I say no thank you, please don't take it offensively. But I'm just doing this for everyone so that I can keep myself above board when it comes to E-rate gift rules. If there are any free services that are included in the response to your Form 470 or a mini bid, if there are free services, the value of those free services must be subtracted from the overall cost of any funding requests. So when it comes to the Form 471, you will have to allocate out the value of any free services that might be associated or tied into the offering that is being proffered to you by the service provider. And then, of course, there's the 28-day waiting period after filing your Form 470 to provide the vendors ample time to respond. With respect to requests for proposals, RFPs are only required for certain products and services. Most commonly, this is for seeking dark or self-provisioned fiber and networking components for dark or self-provisioned fiber. That having been said, RFPs are never a bad idea because they enumerate and they describe exactly what it is that you are seeking in this process. So the more information that you can provide your potential bidders, presumably the better response you're going to be getting from each of them. Even though it may not be required, again, it's recommended, particularly for larger projects, things like wiring a new building or rewiring an old building, special construction, WAN refresh, any kind of large-scale project that really, you're going to have a certain set of requirements and criteria and stipulations. It's best to throw that out there up front so that you can so that your bidders, your potential providers, will have that information as they go through the process. You are able to add RFP documents. We'll actually take a look at this during the demonstration, but you can add RFP documents after you have posted your Form 470 and certified it. For example, you may have a Q&A. You may have a document that has questions and answers. Something like that does not restart the clock on your 28-day waiting period. That having been said, there are instances where you will need to reset the 28-day waiting period clock, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Again, I highly recommend establishing a due date for your responses. That way, if you don't receive it by that date, you are able to simply dismiss that one because it was late. Any other criteria which may result in a disqualification. Um, the inability of a particular vendor to service every building in your district might be a brief example. And now, of course, I'm talking about something that's on a 470, not necessarily from a KETs contract. Sounds like somebody had a question.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Question.
Okay. So Jeremy Simpson, he
Mhm.
asked if we are bidding something such as Cat 1 for fiber. Once we post the 470, which contains the RFP, are we allowed to direct vendors to USAC or send them a copy of the RFP? Or should communication be 100% hands off?
Your I don't think you need to be 100% hands off, but your RFP, if you have an RFP, you should upload it with your Form 470 so that they are together, and that way the service providers, potential service providers, anybody who's going to bid will have access to your RFP already. So that's the way I would handle that. And yes, if they reached out to you and said, do you have an RFP? It's like, yeah, go back into the Form 470 on USAC's website and download it from there. So yeah, I think you can point them to that as long as you've uploaded it with your Form 470. And if you do have an RFP, you do need to make sure that you upload it with your Form 470. Good question.
The reason I was asking Scott is our current vendor for fiber is just a local cable company. So, they may not always, they only really supply us. They may not be going out to the USAC website to look for other schools. So I just didn't want to say, hey, we have posted this. Just want to bring it to your attention, and then that be a violation of some sort. Because I know larger companies such as Windstream, AT&T, and others, they have teams of people that are constantly monitoring USAC. I just
Right.
didn't know if any of the smaller vendors, if you just, being fair, just said, hey, just want to let you know we've done this. You can go here to find it, and that's it. You're not giving them any insider information other than the fact that you posted the 470.
I think you're okay with that. Yeah, I think you're okay to say to a vendor, "Hey, we've got a bid on the street. Go here to find it." As long as you keep it to that and provide them with no additional information, I think you're safe. I think you um, run into problems only if you start being exclusive about that. But as long as you're inclusive and saying, and you're just saying, go here to find it. And I would make sure that if you have multiple local providers who may be small and sort of fit that criteria that you're talking about, Jeremy, that you would contact each one of them. I would do that. As you say, the bigger vendors, you're right. They have teams of people that are working on this stuff on a regular basis, whereas the smaller ones don't. But yeah, I think as long as you say, hey, this is out there, just wanted to let you know, and leave it at that, yeah, you're in good shape still. All righty. And also mention not only in the RFP, but do you want to clearly identify any criteria which might result in disqualification? But you'll also want to make sure that you include that in the narrative of the Form 470 if you are doing a Form 470 as well. If changes are needed to an RFP, you may need to reset the 28-day waiting period. When you're talking about what they refer to now as substantial, back in the day, you might have heard the word cardinal changes. I guess some Cubs fan came along and said, "We don't like the word cardinal." Pardon the sports reference. You will be required to reset the 28-day waiting period for a substantial change. This would be a change to the size, the scope, and/or the nature of the project. If you're adding a significant number of widgets to your request, If you've added multiple buildings, if you've got, well, we thought we were going to do one building, now we're going to do 3 buildings. That's changing the scope of the project pretty significantly. I would definitely, in an instance like that, change or reset the 28-day clock as well. And as you can see, my recommendation is resetting the clock for any changes outside of posting Q&As or FAQs, especially if the time allows. This brings to mind then the importance of starting the process now. Don't wait until the Form 471 window opens before you start filing your Forms 470. You can file a Form 470 for 2025 right now, and in fact, that Form 470 for 2025 was available a couple of maybe about a month ago, which was later than usual. In a typical year, the Form 470 for the upcoming year actually opens about a year ahead of time. So it's usually right around July 1st. For example, 2023, the 2024 Form 470 became available like right around July 1st of 2023. So you should have plenty of time even now to go through this process and make sure that you factor into your timing of all of this, things like board approval. You need to make sure that you have every step of the process done prior to getting to your Form 471, where you're actually going to request funding. That means that any negotiations that would need to be in place would have to be hammered out. You'll need signatures on any contracts from both you and the service provider. And then any board action that might need to be taken in order to finalize those contracts would need to be undertaken and completed prior to filing your Form 471. So if you have a window of about 75 days, which is what you usually have, and that window starts middle of January and runs through the end of March, which is typically right around when that window is open. If you wait until February to file a Form 470, you're leaving yourself with you're leaving yourself with about 2 weeks before the before the close of the filing window, and it's critically important then that you would have to go through all of that process, including any board action. And you might be trying to, you might run into a situation where you don't have another board meeting to have those things approved until after the closing of the Form 471 window. So leave yourself plenty of time. That having been said, the resetting of the clock for any changes outside of, as I say, posting a Q&A or an FAQ, I think is probably the best course of action. All righty. Yep, go ahead. Question.
I'm sorry. So Stella
No, that's okay.
Pollard, she's asking, before we do a 470, would we need to update our DDW?
No.
Discount data.
No, you don't. Yeah. No, you do not. Discount data is separate, and the discount data will need to be updated in Epic no later than the last day of the administrative window, which is usually the Friday before the opening of the Form 471 window. I will encourage everybody to, shameless plug here, toward the end of the month, we have toward the end of November, we have a scheduled session on discount data worksheets and updating that data in Epic. So I will, as I said, shameless plug, please join us for that. That's really, that's of really big importance, not only to you all, but also to the state in terms of the statewide network application that we file on a yearly basis as well. But yeah, you do not need to have that done prior to filing a Form 470. Those are considered two separate things. So good question, Stella. Thank you. All right, I am going to share a different window now. And we're going to run through a Form 470. Let's see if we can get this a little bigger here. There we go. I'm assuming you can see my my screen now. It's showing the applicant landing page. All right, I will assume that that's a yes. Okay, so you log into Epic and you're going to start a Form 470. Your Form 470 is started with the link up here in the upper right, where all of the forms, when you're going to start a new one, that's where you go. We're going to click on that and we will dive right in. I'm going to start with an example of I'm going to say a WAN contract or seeking bids for a WAN contract. And then we'll save and continue. Just shows you a brief set of demographics about your district. This is just sort of a review page. You want to make sure that this is accurate. And then we'll share or save and continue. Are you the main contact person? I think most of the time you're going to be saying yes. If you say no and it's somebody else, you will need to make sure that they are an Epic user in order to be added to this as the contact. Save and continue. Okay. Unlike a Form 471, Forms 470 can have requests for both Category 1 and Category 2 services. And in fact, in certain instances, you are required to have them on the same Form 470. For example, if you are seeking data transmission or internet access and you need equipment for a dark fiber solution, that if you are seeking both of those, that those need to go on the same 470. We're going to use Category 1 here. Generally, I suggest that if they are separate procurements and the two things aren't required to go together, my suggestion is always then to do a separate Form 470 for separate projects. But that is totally up to you. It's really a personal preference thing. Is there an RFP? All right, so here we can see, if you say yes, it opens up the exit, oops. And here we go. All right, so I'm gonna just drag and drop, real nice, real simple. And you can throw that in there. And it does a quick little virus scan and then drops it in there for you. Save and continue. So I've now added my RFP. So for the next set of service requests, select the RFP that applies to all new Category 1 services. So I'm going to just do my one RFP doc there and then save and continue. And then we're going to add a new service request. And it's going to ask you, are you seeking bids for internet access or transmission services, or are you seeking bids for Category 1 networking equipment, maintenance, and operations? For the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to go with just data transmission internet services. You now have a series of choices. If, in fact, you're looking at internet access or data transmission service, I think because you all are receiving your internet access from the state network, in the vast majority, if not all of the cases, you would be seeking to purchase data transmission service only. And obviously, you can see that we have other options. If you are looking at a self-provision network, that you would check off seek to build my own. Are you looking for Wi-Fi on buses? This is where you would seek Wi-Fi on buses. This is also where you would check off to seek wireless internet services delivered by a hotspot for off-premises use. So these are all the different options that you might have under category 1. We're going to go data transmission service only. And then you're seeking capacity, that would be dark fiber. If you're seeking lit service, then you would just simply say data transmission service without internet access service. I'm going to use the dark fiber example. If I were to say this, to select this one, it's going to give me half of what you're going to see on the next page. Oh, excuse me, not even on the next page. I think if we go like this, we'll see. Yeah, it cuts it in half. So let's go back. We're going to go ahead and use this dark fiber example. So for the dark fiber side of things, because as mentioned last week in our training, if you are seeking dark fiber, the requirement is that you accept bids for both dark fiber and lit fiber and then do a cross comparison. So let's just say that you want 12 fiber strands. Minimum maximum capacity is going to be detailed in your RFP. Remember that if you have a dark fiber request, that you are going to have an RFP. And then on the lit leased side, this is going to be the quantity probably of circuits more than anything. And this district has 3 buildings. And then I'm going to select a range of speeds that I might want pricing for. Number of entities served, 3. Are you also seeking installation, activation, and initial config for this service? My suggestion to you is always to say yes on this. That will help result in you getting pricing for it. It does not lock you in to having to get installation, activation, or initial config. All it really does is tells a potential bidder, hey, these folks might be seeking this as well, so you need to price this out for them. Obviously, the more pricing information you can receive, the better you can do a differentiation in terms of the offerings that you receive in the end. Notice that it says this service does not include the modulating equipment needed to light the dark fiber, and you are responsible for obtaining this modulating equipment separately. You could do that on the same Form 470. You can do that on a different Form 470. That one is totally up to you. I would suggest that doing it on the same one is probably the best way to do that. But there is not a requirement that it be on the same one. It is for self-provisioned. All right, and we're going to save our request. And then in the narrative, we're going to do a description of something like seeking service to all buildings in the district. I'm being very vague here. I would suggest that if you don't have an RFP that identifies the locations, that you list the locations in your narrative. Note that I mentioned the minimum and maximum capacity on the least lit fiber side. If you want certain increments to be priced out, please provide pricing for 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig, and 10 gig. So that you will have basically a pricing schedule that becomes a part of any resulting contract, that then in future years, if you need to, let's say that you decide that your elementary school needs 2 gigs, and you establish a 5-year contract, and you have pricing in that contract for all 4 of those increments. 3 years into the contract, you realize that your elementary school needs to be upgraded. If you have only requested 2 gigs and you only have in your contract pricing for 2 gigs, if you want 5 gigs, you have to go back out to bid, and you may run into a situation where you're locked into that contract for 2 more years and you can't get out of it without paying some sort of heavy penalty. The way around that is to make sure that you get pricing for various increments of speed within the range that you've identified. So you've identified that range of 1 gig to 10 gig, but here in the narrative, you can spell it out and say 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig. Give me pricing for all of that, or for each one. That allows some flexibility going forward that you wouldn't have, as I mentioned, if you didn't. Let's see. Response due date 30 days from posted date of 470. So even though there's 28-day waiting period, you might decide, and I kind of recommend this just to give yourselves a couple of days of leeway, that you identify specifically either by date or the number of days, and then wait that period of time, and however much that might be above and beyond the required 28. Failure to submit prior to this date will result in disqualification. Any other disqualifying criteria, you want to make sure that you list them here. Are you seeking an installment plan for the non-discounted portion of any special construction charges? If you are seeking special construction, then you'd probably want to say yes, at least, again, to give yourself the option for an installment plan. You don't have to accept the payment plan, nor do you have to be offered the payment plan by the provider, but it does at least open up your options. So generally speaking, I recommend keeping your options open as much as possible. You can select as many as 4 years, anywhere from 1 to 4 years. Do you prefer annual or monthly payments? You can choose that as well. And then we'll save and continue. Is there a technical contact for this? Yes. You can either search the Epic system for somebody who is or if you say no, then and then you can also enter if they are not an Epic user, you can enter their information here manually. Or you can just say no, and then the contact person is whomever is the primary contact listed previously in the basic information section of the Form 470. Save and continue. Are there any state or local procurement requirements? For Category 1, generally speaking, the answer there is no. For Category 2, you may want to be using, let's see here. No, that's not the one I want. Let's see here. For Category 2, particularly for when you're purchasing from state contracts, it's important to mention the information here that I've just dropped in the window, or excuse me, in the text box here. The districts are required by state regulations to procure only the technologies that meet KETs technical products and standards, if such a standard exists. That's sort of a CYA thing. It's not for something that you're going out for a Form 470 for. It might be something that you would need if you were seeking, for example, MIBs from one of the state contracts. The MIBs, I should say, Managed Internal Broadband Services. This is where you have a third party that does the monitoring and maintenance and care of your day-to-day operations of your network. Those kinds of services, some of them are available from the KETs contracts, but they are not directly E-rate eligible on the KETs contracts because MIBS services did not exist as an eligible category of service until after the current contracts were established. So in order to make those eligible, you would need to go out with a Form 470 of your own and then use the state contracts and consider them as a bid, as if they had been offered to you as a bid. Anybody who's going through that process, feel free to give me a call, drop us an email, ask your questions, because it's just a little bit of a different twist. You basically take an existing contract and treat it as though it had been offered to you as a proposal of service. And then you score it just as you would a bid proposal. And then we go through the review of the Form 470. That's the next page. Notice that it says when the PDF is ready, a task will become available to complete the certification. I'm going to go now up to my tasks. I'm going to click on that. And excuse me, and I'm going to have to do the occasional refresh here of this page until it shows up at the top. There we go, certified form for WAN 2050. Click on that. It brings us back, and note that you have access now to a draft version. It's going to show PDF, and I don't think the PDF is actually going to show up, but what this does, I can that's probably not going to show up because I'm not sharing that. Stop sharing this. Share this. There we go. All right. So you can see then that basically it just takes all of the information that you've provided and drops it into a paper version, or what would be a paper version if somebody printed it out. But it looks like some of the older printed versions. Make sure that each of the bits of information that's included in here is correct, it's accurate, reflects what it is that you are seeking, and then we can go back to our certification window, and we can now check off this box that yes, I have looked at it and it is accurate, it is correct. And then I'm going to continue to the certification function. I'm going to click yes. We now have a series of certifications. All of these are ones that you do have to check off. I am not going to bore you by reading each one of them, but we will check them all off. I do suggest that you know exactly what it is that you are attesting to. So do take a minute to read through and make sure that you understand what it is that you're certifying. And then scroll down and certify. I'm going to hit back for just a second. I want to mention, I do want to mention, let's go back to the edit, and it should take us back to, took us all the way back to the beginning. Go back. Save, continue, save and continue. Save and continue. Save and continue. Oh, already. Okay. Wait a minute. Oops. All right. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Here we go. All right. One thing I do want to mention, just because there are a couple of situations where I've seen in the past that this is relevant. You do have two options in terms of certification. If you yourself are authorized to do the certification on behalf of the district. You're going to use the continue to certification, and you'll see the bit that we just saw a few moments ago with all the certifications and the checkboxes. If, however, your district requires your CFO or your superintendent or some other personnel to certify these documents, you're going to click Send for Certification. What this is going to do is this is going to make the the certification available to all of the full rights users in Epic. So you click on Send for Certification. There you go. See, you want to send your Form 470 to the full rights users in your, do you wish to proceed? You say yes. And then we're going to go back to the tasks. And then you can see that for all of your full rights users, they are going to have this task listed. And what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to click on this link. And then they're going to, again, check the checkbox. And then they're going to continue and they will go and do the certification process. So it's just another way of accomplishing the same thing, but it also allows you to make sure that whomever is responsible for signing off on these documents, they are the ones that have done that if it's not necessarily you. Then we'll click continue. We'll come back to our certifications. Certify. We're going to, civil liability and or criminal prosecution scare you. It's just asking you to make sure that, are you sure that you've truthfully provided all this information? Of course we have. There's no reason to lie on these things. That'd be silly. It'd be counterproductive at best. And now if we go back to our landing page and we scroll down, we should find, when we do our forms search, that we have, there we go, look at that, WAN 2025. Now, we're going to click on WAN 2025, and let's just say that you are in the middle of your 28-day waiting period. You've received a handful of questions from potential bidders, and you want to add a question and answer document so that that all of the potential bidders have access to the same information. And remember, that's incredibly important. You want to make sure that all bidders have access to the information that is the same. You don't want to have anybody that's got more information or perhaps more detailed information than anybody else in amongst your potential bidders. So how would you go ahead about adding this? You're going to, I think if you saw what I did, I clicked on the title of the Form 470 in the previous page after doing the search, and now I can come to related actions, and you'll notice that it says add an RFP document. What do you know? You can actually click that, and now I can add my RFP document. Note, this is something that's new for this year. This asks you, does this new RFP constitute a substantial change? If it's a question and answer document, probably not, unless there's like really, really new detailed information that wasn't in your Form 470 already. You should be able to say no to this. If it does create, if it's a change to your Form 470 in terms of you went from needing, let's say, 5 access points to needing 50 access points, that's a substantial change. You would say yes. And when you do that, you're going to be asked to upload an additional document. In this case, we're going to say no here because we're adding a Q&A. But be aware that if you say yes, it's going to reset the. Oh, it has. Of course. All right, so we'll take that out. Rename the document because it doesn't like. It doesn't like the. What? What happened to that? What happened to it? Damn it. Well, goodness gracious, where did that go? I apologize, folks. Things just keep disappearing on me. Damn it. Here we go. I changed the name of it and it moved the location on my desktop. I didn't ask for it to do that. I love how the assumptions that these things make is just really helpful. Not. Okay, so we've uploaded our Q&A document and then we submit. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to associate this to the service requests that are on this Form 470, and then we submit. And then we say, well, this is just the warning about the previous item. We've already indicated that this isn't going to start a new clock. If you had said yes, it will automatically reset the clock for you. The other thing I'd like to point out, and this is new, is that they have finally added a cancel Form 470 option. Yay! You are able to cancel a Form 470 as long as it has not been cited on a Form 471 in any way, shape, or form. You also, for what it's worth, cannot associate it to a Form 471 until it's been posted for your 28 days. So if you're still in your 28-day waiting period, you can cancel this Form 470 directly just by clicking on that. And it's going to say, okay, so we updated page 3 with new information. Something along those lines, whatever reason it is that you have to cancel that. Just a quick explanation, and then you cancel the Form 470. I'm not going to do that right now just because there's no need to, and might want to use this later for some other purpose. Yes. Okay. So if for whatever reason you realize that you made a mistake, you need to cancel the Form 470 and start over, this is the way that you cancel that. You can also edit a technical contact, you can edit the application nickname, and you can change the contact person. Those are all options that you have with respect to a Form 470. Questions at this point? All right, well, I hear none, so I think we'll just draw this to a close. Caprice, if you would be so kind as to end the recording. Note that if you have questions as you're going through this process, it's one of those things where you might not have the question until you get into it yourself.